said, you're in for a really great treat. Welcome to SOS Hormonal Health. Listen, I heard your cries. Coach Jennifer Nicole, help me. Going through some things I don't really recognize, and maybe my hormones are imbalanced. Well, I've got the leading expert, Dr. Pena. I see that she's in her green room. I'm going to go ahead and share the link to get all of our audience members here. And I want to go ahead and thank Dr. Pena for taking busy time out of her schedule to be with us today. So hang on, Dr. Christina. I see that you're there. Thank you so much. I'll bring you on right at the top of the hour, right at 11 o'clock. So we're going to be answering your questions, which I'm really excited about. Your questions will be answered today here. Join me now. Just sending this out to everybody. You're going to know what not to do and what to do for your hormonal health. That's what is so exciting. I love that we're able to get together and celebrate our successes as women, and we don't have to suffer through this. We don't have to suffer through this. We can actually make it easier to deal with, easier to deal with the side effects. So we're going to have our beautiful expert, Dr. Pena, join us in about 2 minutes, just getting the link out to everybody. And I just love bringing you the top experts in their fields to give you the information that you need. Who's excited about this? I am so excited. So make sure when you take the link, share the link out. Okay, I want you to share the link out. This is exclusive content to our members only. So share it out only in the group. And I am so thrilled to bring Dr. Pena on. She's also going to tell us what we need to do starting right now to help combat any negative side effects leading up to when we go through the menopausal change. Diet, nutrition, your daily healthy rituals that can really impact how well you go through menopause. But you're not alone. You are not alone. We're here to give you help and answer your questions. I just want to say hello to Lynn Wood. We have you here. Thank you so much. Make sure you take this link and you share it out to everyone. I'm going to go ahead and take it to a couple of our VIPs here, also in the chat box, because everyone has just been waiting for this. All right, that is there. Also, we'll be answering your questions. A lot of questions came in, so I will be answering, having Dr. Pena address those first. And I'm so grateful for her help in donating her time and her expertise to us. She's actually doing surgery, I think, today. So, wow, I'm beyond honored that she is here to even help us with some of these questions that you all have sent in. So I'm going to send this to our leaders as well. We are excited. Okay, let me say hello to our audience members as you come on. Hello, Nadine. Hello, Lizzie from the UK. Dr. Jan, welcome. So happy to have you. Thank you, Elizabeth Pickens. Hope that your foot is healing well. Please take this link and share it only in the group. If you're a small group leader, share it in your small group. I put it out into our email list, and I'm going to be bringing on Dr. Pena in about 1 minute. A little bit about her. Dr. Pena, gynecologist and functional medicine specialist located in Miami, Florida. I'm proud to say that she is my new OBGYN because my old OBGYNs were actually the men who delivered my sons, who are now 20 years old and 18 years old. So I knew now that I'm in the big girls club, and I needed to have my needs addressed. So you're going to be going on this journey with me. She graduated from George Washington University School of Medicine as the president of her class. She completed her internship training at the Albert Einstein University at Beth Israel Medical Center and graduated from OBGYN residency at the University of Texas. So shout out to our Texas Torchers. Dr. Pena has served as a member and a president of multiple medical committees in her career. She is a medical correspondent for multiple television and TV networks, including Telemundo, Univision, and NPR. passionate about education. She is an associate professor of the Florida International University School of Medicine. Boy, am I excited to have her on. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and bring on our beautiful panelist and expert and Dr. Cristina Pena. And I just love to bring you the best of the best. And let me tell you what, Dr. Cristina Pena, she cares about women. She is in tune with women and the different stages we all go through. So without further ado, we're going to bring her on, and I'm so excited to have her enlighten us. Her time is very precious, so I'm going to make sure that we jump right in and answer your questions. Hello, Dr. Cristina Pena. Thank you so much for being here with us today.
Hello, how are you?
We are great. We're fabulous. We have a packed house here, so everyone is excited to hear from you, the expert in women's health, especially menopause. And so first of all, thank you on behalf of all of our audience around the world and myself. I'm really excited to have you here and to learn more. I gave you a great introduction. Anything you would want to add about yourself, just to introduce yourself to our audience?
Honestly, I think the most important thing about me is that I'm a person of faith, and everything I do, even this career I chose, every decision I make, any recommendation I make, it's always revolving around what God wanted me to do and what God wants me to teach others and help others in their health.
Wow, I love that. We're so in tune with that. We are a faith-based online coaching community. So, and I didn't really know that. We've talked a couple of times, so I'm glad that that is your foundation and another divine sign that everything happens for a reason. So thank you so much for that. I'm impressed with your credentials and also the information that I got from you just on our short visits when I've seen you the past 2 times. I'm going to jump right in. You know, I hear as a coach, Coach J&L, help me. I'm, you know, in my late 40s, early 50s, my body's different. I'm working out, I'm exercising, but I'm feeling bloated. I'm gaining weight. I'm tired. My hair is thinning, chronic fatigue. I have achy joints. These are some of the telltale signs of menopause. So what other symptoms are there that we might not know of menopause?
One of the top things would be patients start to forget things, and they start to feel this brain fog. And yes, I think especially as women, we multitask way too much. I think we put on a little too much on ourselves. So if you are stressed, I mean, the brain's gonna try and protect itself and try and choose what's important to retain and what's important to focus on. So stress has a lot to do with it. But one of the first hormones in terms of entry, one of the first hormones that's hormone testosterone. And testosterone has been proven to be one of the most active things to the brain, especially in terms of dementia. The longer one lives with low testosterone, the higher the risk for dementia. So that loss of testosterone is huge. We usually actually statistically lose about 50% of our testosterone by the age of 35. Wow. And testosterone also has a lot to do with muscle building. So our energy, our stamina starts to decline. Libido also is testosterone is very important for that. So that's one of the things we also start to decline in our late 30s, even entering into our 40s. And again, stress has a lot to do with it. If you're very stressed out, especially as women, we're very emotional beings when it comes to intimacy and being able to really relax and give ourselves to someone else. It's if our mind's still, working on everything that you have to do in the day, that can definitely interfere with the libido. But that loss of testosterone, which is the first hormone to decline of the ovaries, is huge in that window of time.
Amazing. And you said something very important when on our last visit. You said that sadly enough, women mentioning dementia, that the testosterone, that we're twice as likely to get dementia more than even breast cancer. And that is hormonally, you can actually balance that through your hormones. Is that correct?
Absolutely. Definitely women are much more likely to end up with a type of dementia like Alzheimer's than men. And one of the main reasons we're seeing is, men have testosterone and women as well, but men have a much higher level. So they already start at an advantage. And so if we're already losing testosterone earlier, and another huge thing that I see, unfortunately, is birth control. So a lot of people are put on birth control nowadays since they're a teenager just to regulate their cycle. But when you're put on some kind of medically managed birth control, something that's going to have chemicals and hormones in it, it's going to shut off our ovaries. So if we from very early on in life have essentially made our bodies feel like it's menopause, it's turning off, birth control turns off our ovaries so that we don't ovulate. That's the birth control part of it. But if it's also turning off your ovary's ability to make testosterone, which is very protected to the brain, then you're already at a loss, at a disadvantage, because your body has lost that testosterone that would have protected it until the average age of menopause, at least in this country, is 51. So we're starting already at a big disadvantage with even just the birth control industry. That's just, it seems to be the cure for everything, the cure for PMS, the cure for irregular periods. We're just starting patients with birth control methods way too soon.
Very interesting. You said there's 3 main hormones that balance a woman. What are they again?
So the 3 hormones that the ovaries make, the first one is testosterone. The first one to decline is that testosterone. The second one that starts to decline is the progesterone. Progesterone is primarily involved with maturing eggs and helping ovulation happen. But in terms of other things in the body, progesterone is also very important for our mood. So a lot of women, even way before perimenopause or menopause takes place, they're already suffering from PMS, where a week leading up to the period, they're just moody, they're so tired, they're so many things, they get more brain fog, they just feel like they can't really function. And so progesterone has a lot to do with that. It's very anti-inflammatory to the nerve endings, helps us with relaxing and helping to sleep. So progesterone is very important. And then that third hormone the ovary makes is estrogen, which is usually the last hormone to decline. And so estrogen has a lot to do with what builds the lining in the uterus, which is where blood comes from. So that's why when a woman can finally say, hey, I am already in menopause, that's when they have been a full year without even a drop of blood, because that's when we could say, okay, that last hormone estrogen is not coming back, at least not from the ovary. And that's when the person can say officially they're in menopause. But perimenopause, all the symptoms that come prior as those hormones, the testosterone started to decline, then the progesterone started to decline, that can start from 10 to 15 years before even the person can say they're officially in menopause, that they went through that 1 year without a drop of blood.
Very interesting. Great facts to know. I know that my mother's generation and her generation, they were just going to suffer through it. I don't want to take any hormones. I don't want to imbalance my hormones because I'm afraid of getting breast cancer. Now our generation is, you don't have to suffer. And with the new innovative ways for hormone replacement therapy, you are negating the possibilities of having possible breast cancer because of the hormones. Can you go into a little bit of depth of that and how it has changed over the years?
Absolutely. So there's a huge difference between synthetic hormones and what we would call natural hormones. So the synthetic hormones, a lot of it has to do even with where they come from. So in a lab, in a pharmaceutical lab, they can completely create the structure of what these hormones look like. And those are then at that point completely synthetic. They didn't come from any animal source, any plant source. They were completely synthesized in the lab. Then there's hormones that we can get from the urine of female horses. So we can get estrogen and testosterone that comes out of the urine of these female horses. And we can try also and synthesize them and maybe tweak them to look a little bit more like the humankind, but there's still something synthesized from an animal source. Then there's plant sourced hormones. So it turns out that so all hormones come from cholesterol, okay? All hormones come from cholesterol. So when we even talk in general about bad cholesterol, good cholesterol, there's different kinds of cholesterol in the body. And a lot has to do with how your body metabolizes those hormones. So we can get the cholesterols from plants. And it turns out that their cholesterols look the most similar to the human types of hormones, including the estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone hormones of the humankind. In fact, one of the only differences really between the plant-based, the plant-sourced hormones and the human is just the position of one carbon molecule. So if you can Google even what is the structure of what hormones look like, and you can just Google an image of that, you'll see like little pentagons and hexagons and all these like stick figures coming together. So the plant sourced one is the closest to the humankind. So all they need to do is actually tweak the position of one of those little sticks, and all of a sudden it's identical to the humankind. So that's when we can say this is bioidentical hormone, because the hormone is structurally identical to that of the humankind, to our biology. So that's where the term bioidentical hormones come from. Now, can we have structurally identical hormones made whether they came from animals or whether they were completely synthesized in the lab. Yes. So I always recommend definitely a bioidentical hormone because it's what the body's going to recognize most as its own. But it's also important where they source it from. Right. So you have to, if you're going to, speak to a provider about bioidentical hormones, you want to know, well, where does it come from? I understand the endpoint structure is identical to my biology, but where does it come from? And the reason why that's important is because the studies showed that the body almost was able to tell the difference, even though the endpoint was the same. The body reacted differently, whether this came from a plant, an animal, or completely synthesized in the lab. Wow. And the studies show that the plants, again, the ones that come from plants, and we actually take them from yams. So, and we learned that yams had a high amount of all these hormones that are similar to ours because we studied a group of women in Okinawa, Japan. So that's an island in Japan where there's a few pockets in this world of cultures that are the longest living. And the Okinawans happen to be one of those. They lived to their 100 and teens and with good health the whole time. We thought we were going to find something amazing in their genetics, but it turned out it was in their food supply. These women and the men, the culture in general just eats tons and tons, pounds and pounds of these vegetables. So even though women did go into menopause, which menopause ultimately means the ovaries have no more eggs left, so there's no more fertility available. So they still went through that, but they never went through the symptoms. They never felt the lack of hormones, and that's because they were consuming it. So
amazing.
So
quick question, are yams the same as sweet potato or different?
They're the same. The only thing I do have to say is obviously in that island, the soil is a lot richer than ours. Got it. And our food supply has been a little diluted over time. Yes. Our soils are being depleted. So I still would recommend eating more sweet potatoes. Definitely, there's so many nutrients and benefits to our hormones if we do that here. Wow. But one detail that we also learned from them, so they were eating tons of vegetables that gave their body estrogen-looking hormones, testosterone-looking hormones, and progesterone-looking hormones. But they also ate more than 2 to 3 pounds a day of cruciferous vegetables. Cruciferous vegetables includes the broccoli, the Brussels sprouts, the cauliflower. And it turns out that there's a nutrient that as you're digesting those foods, there's a nutrient called DIM, D-I-M, stands for diindomethane. And that nutrient looks for excess estrogen in our body, helps break it down into a state that's not inflammatory. So we now know that a lot of cancers are led by estrogen being too dominant. So even though they were eating through all these yams and sweet potatoes, they were eating foods that were giving them a lot of estrogen. It's somehow, I don't know whether it just got passed down through generations. They just simply knew that those extra cruciferous vegetables helped make sure that that estrogen they were consuming still managed to be lower. The proper proportion of hormones, like when we were in our 20s and early 30s, when we had the least risk for cancers and disease, our testosterone levels were more optimal and our estrogen was lower. As we get older, we start to lose that testosterone. That's what starts to create this estrogen dominance. So they knew enough to eat plenty of those cruciferous vegetables that it still brought their estrogen levels lower in comparison to that more protecting testosterone.
This is brilliant. These are no to low cost ways you can start today to balance your hormones. Get up on those sweet potatoes, which we've always been preaching here. Get your yams, cruciferous vegetables, your broccoli. And also, I'd like to ask you this question, where a lot of women say, oh, I don't want to know. I'm going to turn a blind eye. I'll just go through the change. I'm afraid that I'll get breast cancer from doing the synthetics or doing the ones that, it's so interesting that it came from horse urine, digesting that. But then you said something very important in our last meeting, doctor, where you said, if you don't balance your hormones, you're actually opening up yourself to higher risk of getting breast cancer because testosterone protects your breasts. So if you're low on testosterone, and that's the first to go, correct? Yes. You're then opening up your body to a higher risk of breast cancer. Can you elaborate on that?
Absolutely. So the studies have shown that testosterone blocks estrogen receptors in our breasts. So our breasts are full of cells that when, let's say, we're getting ready to ovulate and our estrogen hormones are also higher, that estrogen would be in circulation and it can enter our breasts. So if we didn't have enough testosterone at that time to block that excess of estrogen coming in, then we'd be at a higher risk for breast cancer. And that's one of the things that we also see, again, going back to the birth control methods, that those birth control methods that block our ovaries from functioning, those birth control methods have estrogen looking compounds and progesterone looking compounds, but then there's no testosterone, and it blocks our ovaries from making testosterone. So we do know that already those who consumed birth control methods like pills or patches, devices that release hormones, we actually increase risk of breast cancer by as much as 51%. It doesn't mean your risk is 51%. What it means is, let's say a person's baseline risk for cancer was 3%. Well, now a person who took birth control methods in the past, they actually have increased their breast cancer risk to about 5%. So an extra like 51%. So in terms of hormone replacement, patients who are only offered synthetic methods, so synthetic estrogen or synthetic progesterone, no woman will tolerate a synthetic testosterone. It causes way too much masculinization, which is why the traditional recommendations and the traditional hormone replacement methods, they only gave patients estrogen and progesterone. So without that extra testosterone to protect and block those receptors on our breasts, yes, the traditional methods of a synthetic hormone replacement will increase risk for breast cancer, because you're not only adding estrogen, but then you're not even giving anything to protect and block that estrogen from getting into the cells. Whereas women who do the bioidentical hormone replacement, where it came from plants, women do tolerate that testosterone. It's so similar to ours. We absorb it as if it was our own. So we do then have that better balance of what our hormones were like when we were younger, when we didn't have those risks for the cancers like we do when we're older. When we're older, those risks go up because we lose those protective hormones, and testosterone is one of the most protective. In fact, there's studies that have shown that women who even had breast cancer in the past and they're in remission, they've done treatments of just testosterone replacement by itself, especially if their tumors on their breast were fed by estrogen. We do say, well, we're not going to add more estrogen, but let's give you some protection and add testosterone replacement. And the studies show that women who are in remission from breast cancer, who are given testosterone replacement, they reduce their chance of the breast cancer ever coming back in the future by almost more than 50%.
Wow. So that was a big takeaway. So make sure you have to,
whether they had breast cancer or not in the past.
Right. So whether they had breast cancer in the past or not, making sure you're balanced with your testosterone is going to really safety net you and help reduce the risk of having breast cancer, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Now, most of the studies on that came out of Greece, and there's also a huge study that came out of Texas. We basically were, the hormone replacement that I give here in my office also comes from plants. Most of what I do actually is either topical or pellets that are under the skin. And the studies that really proved what I just said were on the pellets. They didn't see the same happen with the creams. Okay. But with something, when a hormone is placed under the skin and the body absorbs it as it needs it through your heart rate, and we can get into that a little bit more going forward, but the studies proved this using the testosterone pellets themselves. Okay.
This is amazing. Yes. And I'd almost like to ask you this question. And I know every case is different. Every woman is different. And I respect that. And there's no right way to address everybody. But if you had to go to the most superior and best method of bioidentical hormone replacement therapy, would that be the pellet and then a nighttime cream, as you mentioned before? What is the best way to answer that question?
So ultimately, the answer is going to be, when it comes to replacing estrogen and testosterone, those two are best through a pellet under the skin. And when it comes to progesterone, that one is best orally in the evening time. And I can explain why that is. Please. So estrogen and testosterone are hormones that we tend to need more of when our heart rate happens to be higher. For example, you go now to exercise, your heart rate's going to go up. That heart rate going up is going to have circulation going by your ovaries. And if you were still optimally making enough hormones through your ovaries, that's going to be what's going to basically instigate your ovary to produce and release more of that testosterone in circulation, so that that testosterone can meet the demand you're giving it of muscle building and stamina in your workout. Let's
Wow.
say you're going to be intimate. When you're intimate, your heart rate's going to go up. That heart rate's going to do the same. More circulation going by those ovaries, more optimal production of that testosterone, which you need for your libido, so that the orgasm can then eventually occur. When you're under more stress, your heart rate's going to be higher. You're doing tons of things throughout the day. You need that extra testosterone to give you that energy and stamina throughout the day, that mental focus, since testosterone is so important for that. Yet, and the same goes with estrogen. You happen to need more of it when your heart rate's higher. So if we place something under the skin, it acts as the same reservoir of what the ovaries would have been. So if your ovaries still had those hormones to produce, they would go with the circulation. But if we're entering menopause and the ovaries are just not making it as much, then we basically just place something under the skin, and it's going to respond by your heart rate the same. Your heart rate goes up, there's going to be more circulation going by where that pellet is placed under the skin. And so you're going to absorb more in those times. When you're sleeping at night, your heart rate's less. When you're less stressed out, your heart rate's lower. So you're not going to then circulate as much to not absorb as much in those times. So it ends up being the closest to our physiology, where you don't really give yourself too much or too little, because it's self-adjusting to what you do in the day and what your needs are. Progesterone's a little different. So progesterone, in fact, is one of the things that tends to go up higher in the evening, because it is a more calming hormone. That's why progesterone is so good for patients who start suffering from anxiety and all these mood changes that we're getting into further and further into menopause. And then unfortunately, the primary care physician will just say, well, you just need an anxiety medication or an antidepressant. And it's really just the progesterone's low. So progesterone starts to go up at night, and that's what starts to bring down our stress hormone, which is called cortisol. So cortisol normally goes up in the morning, and it helps us meet all the demands of the day. But by the end of the day, we need to have that cortisol shut off, if not, or at least, decline, so that we can start to relax and be able to rest and recharge. And what helps that cortisol really come back down is that rise in that progesterone. And then, by the way, that's what allows melatonin to be produced. So some patients feel like they've heard, hey, I need to just take some melatonin to help me sleep. Well, if they take melatonin, which is available over the counter, they never shut off their cortisol, because they were still missing that progesterone that would have done it. So the melatonin tends to not work as well, and that stress hormone just stays high. And stress hormone, just if it's high for too long, it stops helping us, and it actually starts to cause more inflammation. And that's part of the weight gain and the belly fat. All of this is part of the difficulties that we get as we get older. Even the hair loss, all that cortisol being high, it's just creating inflammation around the hair follicles, starts to thin things out. And it's just one big unfortunately, an imperfect storm that causes all the symptoms and signs we see with menopause.
Wow, you answered a lot of our questions that came in, and some questions came in while you were doing that beautiful explanation. The pellet, where is it placed in the body?
Okay, so the pellet looks almost like a tablet of aspirin. It's a tablet. It's not in a capsule, so it's gonna disintegrate. Okay. They're very small. They're maybe smaller than a Tic Tac. And we usually choose to place them by the buttocks, because that's where, as women, we tend to have a little bit more fat deposits. So it's a nice cushion there in the fat between the skin and the muscle. There's a good area there where circulation can be able to pick it up. These pellets usually last patients about 4 months. So my patients typically come here 3 times a year for me to place their next pellet. And the other great thing about these pellets under the skin, this is the only thing that can truly be dosed individually to the patient. Any cream I would give a patient, there's no way we can really track it in the blood. Anything orally, there's no way we can really track it in the blood, because, for example, oral is just, you digest it, it might peak and drop fairly quickly. So it's not like I can know what's the right time I need to do a blood test to catch it. Right. Anything topical is going to pretty much just kind of peak and drop within 4 to 7 hours. And a lot of the topical doesn't even get fully absorbed. And in a topical prescription I'd be giving to a patient, let's say I send a month's supply, she's going to have the same click, the same dose every day. So some days I'm giving her too much for what her demands were of the day. Other days I might not be giving her enough. If she was more active, decided to work out more, starting to train for a marathon, I might not be giving her enough, but there's no way I can track it in the blood.
Amazing. Amazing.
Things under the skin are, go ahead.
Oh, yeah, you answered another question, but I just want to reiterate real quick. A question came in saying, I'm doing great during the day, but when I get to sleep, I fall asleep, but then I wake up and I can't go back to sleep and my mind goes crazy. I have the anxiety. I can't kind of like quiet my mind. You
Yeah.
answered that with the progesterone. How do you take that? Is that with a pill? Is it liquid?
We could do both. We could do it in a liquid or a capsule. The ideal probably to help people with sleep will probably be the capsule, something that actually gets absorbed. And part of it is actually how we digest it and eliminate it through the liver. There's something that happens there that actually has a little bit of a sedating effect. So for those patients who say, you know, all of a sudden at 4 o'clock in the morning, I'm waking up and I can't get back to sleep, it's typically that is the ideal. And so that's usually I tell patients, take it with dinner because you do need food to help you absorb it better. And usually about an hour, hour and a half later, patients are starting to feel relaxed and sleepy, ready for bed. And then they just can sleep the whole night and feel also refreshed in the morning because you actually rested. You were able to bring those cortisol levels down, which are so inflammatory.
Amazing. Oh, I'm getting so much information. Everyone is loving this. Our audience is just so happy with all your information. And we have another question for you. The old school is, I'm going to suffer through it. I can take the hot flashes. And a lot of women finally realize after years of going through the struggle that they just can't. They really just kind of give it and say, I need help with this. And they end up going to their OBGYN. But is it true that if hot flashes are left unaddressed, that they can actually lead to some certain other health problems?
So the primary reason for hot flashes is estrogen drops. Okay. And estrogen is very protective in many ways. So we want balance always with estrogen. If it's too high, it can cause problems, but if it's too low, it can cause problems. So the too low, for example, estrogen is very important in maintaining bone density. Okay. So if you think, well, most patients, I mean, nowadays we have longer lifespan. So you could be super healthy, but if for some reason you've lost so much bone density that you're in your 60s, you know, maybe even early 70s, and you fall, you break a hip, well, guess what? That's the leading cause for morbidity and mortality. Now you're immobilized, higher risk for blood clots. So much more likely that you just shortened your lifespan. Whereas if you had continued with giving your body the hormones that it needed to help slow down that aging, you'll be able to have a much longer life. Better quality also is definitely what we look at.
Yes. Oh, so important. I know you touched upon, by the way, my mother fell in the kitchen, broke her femur, just falling, breaking the largest bone of her body. And it just really supports everything you've been saying there. So thank you so much for that. I want to know why women are very weary of going to do hormone replacement therapy. We mentioned a couple of reasons, but what would you say are the top 3 reasons why women are weary of doing hormone replacement therapy?
I think the main reason is that their doctors are weary because their doctors don't have all the information. So for example, yes, everything that I know and everything that I've been explaining to you now, this wasn't anything at all that I was taught in medical school or in residency. So yes, it basically either needs to come from that physician that when they graduate and they find that they have patients that they want to help, they're having all these symptoms, quality of life issues. But then this is what happened to me. Then I just basically started realizing there's got to be something else. Yeah. I have to be able to help these women because we can't just, you know, say, all right, deal with it and, you know, age. No, there's got to be something else. So I went to conferences. I did my own research. I did so much, I mean, hours and hours of looking at studies and seeing what they're doing in Europe and in Asia. And for example, this pellet therapy I just talked to you about, there's nothing new about this. The first pellets were made in 1939. But why is it are unaware of it? Even perhaps for the busy life, and they're trying to do so much, they don't really dedicate themselves to say, hey, I need to find something for these women. So thankfully, at least there are a lot of physicians out there that have done this, you know, after residency training and fellowship training, and to be able to give those options to patients. So for example, you mentioned you're now transitioning to another OBGYN because your OBGYN delivered your babies. And so they dedicated themselves to be the best at obstetrics and minimizing risk. But then now it's time to look for someone that maybe took the time to go off to a different branch of this specialty and then be able to offer more options for patients.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yes. I mean, great doctors, but when they're like, oh, how are you feeling? We'll keep an eye on it. Keeping an eye on it. I got a little weary. I want to see blood tests. I want to see where I'm at. By the way, as a woman who's maybe in their mid 40s, late 40s, what is the first approach to balancing your hormones? Is it just getting your blood work done?
I definitely start with getting blood work done, but I also give out my patients a checklist of symptoms that I want them to complete, because a lot of patients might not even realize that, for example, that joint pain had to do with hormone loss. For example, testosterone is very important in stimulating what's called stem cells in our joints to help make the fluid that would keep the inflammation low there. So I give a whole checklist. I start to get a timeline. Is this something that's been gradually getting worse? Is this something that all of a sudden, occurred? I do a full panel of labs to make sure there's not anything else that can explain these symptoms that the person is having.
Right.
But then, for example, if I still see that their ovaries are producing these hormones, but maybe they're not as optimal yet, doesn't necessarily mean they need hormone replacement. There's a lot of things that I do in terms of lifestyle, nutrition, especially nutraceuticals that I can use on patients that helps free up and optimize more what their ovaries are already making. Yes. When it gets to the point that I already can see, okay, we've maxed out on this, your ovaries are just not making it anymore, that's when a patient then becomes a candidate for now replacement. Okay. Yes,
brilliant. I love it. And when I had my last visit with you, we did a Pap smear, and you said something very startling, which, 30 to 40% of Pap smears are incorrect. Can you maybe shed just a little bit of light on that before we go back to the hormones and the menopause?
You got it. So Pap smears are a technology from the 1960s. It was Dr. Nicole who discovered it. And they're only 30 to 50% accurate. So technically speaking, the majority of Pap smears that I'm looking at when those results come in, I should question them because there's a high likelihood that they might be a false negative. So in the 90s, we learned that what causes the majority of the cancers in the cervix for women, because that cancers, it was the #1 cancer causing death for women in the past. Now it's the least almost, because we now have learned so much. We've learned what causes this. So the majority of those cancers are caused by a virus called HPV, stands for human papilloma virus. So we do have testing now that we can do HPV testing, and that's 90% accurate. So really the standard of care now is no patient should ever just get a Pap smear done. It should always be in combination with some kind of HPV test. Now, the other thing that I mentioned to you is in the last 9 years, there's a new test that came out, and it's considered a tumor marker for cervical cancer. And it can be done through the same swab, same little brush that of a regular Pap smear. It's just when the bottle gets to the lab, then they will be able to add this additional technology. So that test is 98% accurate. And that test by itself almost combines what a Pap and an HPV test does. A Pap is supposed to tell me, are the cells healthy looking? And then aside, if there's something abnormal about those cells, then the HPV test will tell me, well, could it possibly be HPV that's causing that? Amazing. So this new test that we call a tumor marker is called HPV E6E7. If anybody wants to kind of Google it and research it, that's the test. So if your doctors are not doing that for you, would be something important. You should ask them to start to add to your testing.
Absolutely. Brilliant, brilliant points. I really love the information. We're getting a ton of questions, and I know your time is very valuable. Maybe another 5 more minutes, because I know you're doing surgery today.
Yeah. I thought I was going to be all dolled up for you, hair done, makeup, but I had a few emergency surgeries. So here I am, my scrubs.
We respect your time, and I want to be a good steward of your time, but we're getting a lot of great information. Thank you so much.
I hope I'm helping people.
Oh, you really are so much. And anything that we can do, because we can buy another designer handbag, we can get another jacket. But when you need to stop and get yourself into a doctor's visit to make sure you're safety netting yourself against from breast cancer, cervical cancer, things you can do, hot flashes, bone density. And it really is so important, because I've seen women, they're healthy working out, but then they just like almost drop. It's like they drop and they just age overnight. Is that because they're not balancing their hormones?
Absolutely. I mean, exercise, diet, genetics, all of that takes into account, but those hormones, when those hormones start to decline, you really notice that rapid aging. Just even on the skin, you can keep buying more expensive moisturizers and all these creams, and it doesn't hold. That moisture is gone. That estrogen is so important for the hydration, for the elasticity, for collagen. It's really important. So I mean, I always recommend patients to be proactive, because there's only so much I can reverse. So, I do have patients that come in their 60s and they already went through all the hot flashes, all that's done, but they're just not feeling well. And the emotional part is there too. So, and then they start, but there's only so much I can at that point reverse. So for example, bone density, that's one that can be reversed very well with testosterone. In fact, the testosterone pellets has proven to be able to increase bone density by as much as 8.3% per year, compared to osteoporosis medications that can only do maybe about 4% and also come with much greater risks, including bone cancer. So bone is one I can definitely reverse quite a bit, especially if someone starts later. But in terms of the cosmetics, the things we feel, a lot of that, if you start proactively, you basically slow down your aging. And that's what we're just trying to maintain for that quality of life.
Absolutely. And it's a lot of brain changes. You have the fuzzy, foggy, jet lag brain memory. You have that kind of low libido. You kind of feel that confidence. And a lot of it is neurological, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I have so many patients that tell me, like, they look at themselves in the mirror and they're like, I don't even recognize myself anymore. It's like, I used to be a go-getter. I used to never be like nervous or anxious about anything. And now they kind of pause and they're just, it changes them. And especially when you're in a relationship and your husband's noticing this and he's like, you're not yourself. And it can sometimes, especially when the libido becomes a problem, that affects the relationship. And the last thing I want is, and I think the last thing, your partner would want is for you to just force something to please them. This is
big.
You're both, giving of yourselves to each other. So I mean, if your partner really loves you, he's not going to want you to do something that can either hurt you because you now have vaginal dryness or you're forcing something. I mean, it really affects the relationship, the dynamic, and then of course, just you as a person and who you are.
Brilliant points, because I do a lot of coaching and women have said exactly what you said. I don't feel like myself. Something is off. I'm exercising, I'm working out, I'm reading my positive quotes, I'm going to all the conferences, but I just don't feel like myself. And it's like their mind is playing games on them. And that is due to hormonal imbalance, correct?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And it's so simple. You can just balance the 3, get your baseline, balance the 3. I've learned so much. We have 2 more questions real quick, if you don't mind. Is it true that 80% of women are hormonally imbalanced, or what is the percentage?
Honestly, I don't know of a percentage. I haven't read maybe enough of those environmental studies that they've done, but I will tell you what I see in my office every day. And so many women are hormone imbalanced from the young also to those who are already transitioning into menopause. And I mean, there are so many factors to it, between what's in our foods, what's in our beauty products, like so many things that interfere with hormones. So many of us are much more overweight, and in fat cells you store estrogen. So already most of us are estrogen dominant to begin with. So there's a lot of reasons for it. I would say a good amount of women are hormonally imbalanced. I don't know if it's 80%, but I will say a good amount. But one more detail I did want to add, because you mentioned about balancing those 3 hormones. When I do labs on patients to get their baseline labs, I check everything. I check hormones that come from our pituitary, which is at the base of our brain. I check hormones of the adrenals. I check thyroid. And I go into much more detail than most primary cares do, because I also have found that if something else is off, no matter what I do in terms of even the menopausal hormone replacement, those hormones just don't even come into the cells properly if there's something else happening in the body and there's inflammation. So we always want to make sure that there's no other reasons for these symptoms, make sure the person is optimal, and then they actually respond to any of the menopausal hormone replacement treatment.
Amazing. It is so essential to stop women and take a great good look and a snapshot of where your hormones are now. I can't thank you enough, Dr. Cristina Pena. We have one last question we would love to ask you, and it goes to lifestyle. Maybe 2 quick questions. What can we do now to make sure we are living our best, healthiest life, or working out? I know you mentioned when I did my coaching consultation with you, when you work out, you have the muscle fires off the testosterone. So you're naturally producing testosterone. Mm-hmm. Of course, getting your sleep, drinking your water, staying hydrated. But my test came back that I'm dehydrated. I don't know how, because I drink about 10 of these a day. So you have to understand, it goes so much more than just bikini medicine of the breast, the vagina. It's a whole lifestyle, which you really embody. So what can we do to really help live our healthiest lifestyles, to balance our hormones naturally, number one. And then number two, worst case scenario, a woman's coming in, thinning hair, achy joints, she feels horrible. Is there hope for her? And can she balance her hormones?
So to answer number one, I'd say everything starts with inflammation. All the disease and progression starts with inflammation. So your diet, you want to make sure you're having an anti-inflammatory diet. So you want to stay away from sugars, the most inflammatory. I do a lot in terms of trying to stay low on lectins. So lectins, a lot of people know about gluten. So gluten is a type of lectin. Lectins are very inflammatory, low-level toxins in some foods. So if you try and keep low to that, you're going to already help your joints. You're going to already help your cells not be inflamed, so that the hormones your body is producing can enter cells better. So diet is huge. You want to be on an anti-inflammatory diet. And then in terms of exercise, very important to do probably actually more than aerobic. You want to do things that use resistance and weight. So whether you're using your own body as weight, like Pilates, you're manipulating your own body weight, you're using resistance bands or weights, that's what's huge to help muscle, to help bones, and definitely in terms of hormone production. So lifestyle, I'd say those are the top two things. And I also bring in you want your soul to be at peace. So definitely, seek, pray, meditate, however it is, that's so healing to the body. And just in so many more ways than we even can quantify. And then for your last question, there's always hope. There's definitely hope. So if someone's already even transitioned into menopause and they've already been a few years into this and they were maybe holding back on considering hormone replacement, hopefully what I've said today has opened you up to look into it a little bit more, and hopefully you can find a physician that can do it in a safe way and optimize your hormones so that your quality of life can return and you can just age happier and age healthier.
Wow. I mean, a round of applause for you. You are the Wonder Woman of hormone replacement balancing therapy. We're so grateful for you. What an expert. We know your time is very valuable. So thank you for this 45 minutes of Ram Jam packed, informative power session in between surgeries and appointments. We really appreciate your time. And so thank you so much on behalf of myself, doctor, and all of our audience. And we had women from around the world saying, do you do remote visits? Can I come visit you? You can find out more information from you at gableshealth.com, correct?
Absolutely. And yes, we do telemedicine. If you're international, we use Zoom. If you're in the States, we have our own system here for telemedicine. So yeah, you can give us a call anytime. My
okay,
pleasure.
Great. Well, I'll make sure I share your information because you are amazing. You're going to help so many live their best lives. And life doesn't happen to end after you hit menopause. We're going to live the best of our lives together. Thank you for your time and God bless you. We really appreciate you. And for everyone that tuned in, we love you and thank you so much. Until next time, smile.